That was the Soft Boys with an animal tin, Lions and Tigers, which is directly connected to today's guest, Carole Baskin, founder of Big Cat Rescue, the Tampa sanctuary that houses more than 100 abused and abandoned big cats. So with a reminder that we invite you to join the conversation by calling 813-239-9663 or emailing us at dj@wmnf.org. Let's welcome Carole Baskin back to Talking Animals. Good morning, Carole.
Hi, thank you for having me.
This 2012 marks 20 years of rescuing big cats, and so over those 20 years, what would you say are 2 to 3 maybe ways the sanctuary has changed most profoundly?
Well, I tell you what, if I had it to do over again, I never would have rescued the first animal. And the reason is, what I've discovered is that even though we have rescued several hundred animals over the course of our 20 years and have really done right by them, we're saving tens of thousands of animals through the legislative efforts. And the 100 animals that I currently care for, we're having to raise somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.5 to $1.8 million a year to take care of feeding and properly caring for those animals. If that money were going into changing the laws so that people couldn't be breeding and exploiting these animals, it'd be over. Yeah, we would have fixed this problem by now. So we started out as a sanctuary. Well, we started out just by rescuing some animals and not having any idea what we were doing. And, of course, the only people we could go to for advice back then were the breeders and dealers who said you should be breeding some of these rare animals. So we did in the early years of the sanctuary. But when we discovered that there were no places that these animals, these exotic cats, were going to be able to be released back to the wild, we stopped breeding and discovered that the only way we were really going to fix this problem was through changing the laws.
Well, with that in mind, let me just ask you one other sort of similar question. Then I do want to spend some time on legislation, which it sounds like we're kind of the whole ball game really is.
Sorry, I just can't leave it alone.
Yeah, no, and I of course plan to ask you about that. But just a sort of a parallel question to the thing I asked about over those 20 years. You know, the way the sanctuary might have changed most profoundly. Over those 20 years, what are 2 or 3 ways you think you have changed most profoundly?
I am something of a recluse. I would just as soon never leave my home. And so to have to get involved in speaking to people, speaking to large groups of people, I speak to colleges and animal welfare groups and, of course, always lobbying at both the state and federal level. It's taken me way outside of my comfort zone, and I still don't like doing it. I hear an awful lot of people say, well, I don't want to get involved in politics. If you love animals, you have to get involved in politics. That's the only way you're going to fix the problem. So it's changed my, it hasn't changed my attitude toward it, but it's changed my willingness toward it. Yeah,
you've pushed past that attitude about public speaking and those kinds of experiences, it sounds like. Yeah. So, okay, so really, as you kind of alluded to, I mean, anyone that's really been around the animal world, or especially animal welfare world for any length of time, has found themselves, often asking, well, why isn't there a law against that? Or how can we pass a law against that? So, and kind of also, as you've often alluded to, related to that, it's really comes down to often the only meaningful solution to a host of animal welfare problems. So tell us about, some of the legislation currently or pending that you've become involved with that obviously would tie most directly, of course, into big cats.
We've had some great wins here in Florida. It used to be legal to keep cougars as pets, and so we finally got the Florida Wildlife Commission to deem the cougar as a Class 1 animal so that they can no longer be handled and out in public and walked on leashes and all of the kinds of crazy things people were doing. But in July of 2011, probably the most profound change came about as we got involved with the International Fund for Animal Welfare, the Humane Society of the United States, World Wildlife Fund, Born Free, and the Animal Legal Defense Fund, as well as the Ian SOMERHALDER Foundation. And we all got together in D.C. We sat around a table and said, okay, with all of our collective organizations, what can we do to end the problem with all of these big cats living in backyards and basements and being bred for all of these horrible purposes? And what we came up with was a 3-prong approach. And so what we decided to do was the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had inadvertently created a loophole because the zoos, the accredited zoos, when they breed tigers, have to go through a lot of paperwork to do that. And people were breeding white tigers, which are crossbred and inbred and don't serve any kind of conservation value. And so U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service didn't want to have to deal with all the paperwork and decided to say, okay, if it's a generic tiger, then they don't have to jump through all these hoops. Well, that just opened the floodgates, and these people were breeding tigers like crazy, mostly trying to produce white tigers because people would pay to see white tigers. So what we did was we went to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and said, you guys really need to close that loophole. And they put it out to the Federal Register a year ago. And for the first time ever, they got 15,000 comments in support of closing that loophole. Usually they get maybe 1,200 to 1,800 comments on a really hot topic. Yeah. 15,000 is just like crazy. So that was hugely successful. The second prong of the approach is that we believe that USDA could stop all of this cub petting and all of the breeding where breeders are taking the cubs from the mothers at just a couple of days of age and then passing them around to people, charging $15, $20 for people to handle them. And we felt like that already violated the Animal Welfare Act as far as creating stress and trauma for the cubs. And so we went to them as a group and did a presentation with a huge thick book I should have brought for you to see about all of the results of that kind of bad activity and how these animals are living in these horrible conditions and the cubs covered in ringworm and spreading that to the public and all of this kind of stuff. And asked them to close that loophole that they had created inadvertently as well. They said, you shouldn't use cubs under the age of 8 weeks because they don't have any kind of an immune system, and you shouldn't use them over 12 weeks because they can bite a finger off or be dangerous. Well, what they did is it created this 8 to 12 week window, so people are using the cubs for a month at a time. So anyway, we went to them, we asked them to eliminate all contact with exotic cat cubs. They said they couldn't do it under their current rules, and so we filed a formal petition with USDA saying, well, if you can't do it under current rules, you need to make a new rule. Like everybody always says, there ought to be a law against that, and we agree. And so we did that, and then the third prong was to have federal legislation that bans the breeding and private possession of these cats. And that was introduced in the House in April and in the Senate in October. And we currently have about 60 co-sponsors, so it's moving along well. And we know bills like this will usually take a couple of sessions to pass, so we'll reintroduce it again next year. But I'm confident that this is something that people can get behind because there's no reason to be breeding all of these big cats just for that 1 month window.
And that reminds me one thing that when we were setting up this interview, and you were kind of alluding to the legislation you just mentioned, and you kind of said that those bills will probably die. And then you said, beyond that, something like most exotic animal bills take 6 years or so to pass. Yes. Why is that? Just, legislation churns along slowly, but is there something specific beyond that about exotic animal bills that cause them to be even slower to make their way or get enough votes? Or
no, actually, I think they probably carry more momentum than an awful lot of issues do, and there's something that the vast majority of people can agree on. The reason it takes so long is because only 3% of the bills that are introduced actually make it into law. So there's an awful lot of competition just to be heard.
Sure. So it's a percentage issue as much as what the content really is.
The last bill that we got passed was in 2003, and it took 6 years to do it because it was 3 2-year sessions. But it was almost unanimous. When it finally comes to a vote, most people can agree that you shouldn't have big cats as pets, and you shouldn't be allowing people to have contact with big cats. So we know it's going to pass. It's just a matter of time.
As that logic spreads ever wider. So I don't know if you want to briefly just explain a little bit more about pay to play. I mean, you've kind of alluded to, but just what that really means.
When the Big Cat Coalition got together, what we tried to determine was how big is this problem? And what we found is there are about 33 places that we could find that are publicly advertising that you can come and play with a baby tiger or baby lion. And if you figure the USDA guidelines that are limiting the size cats they can use, even at a very conservative estimate, we figure there's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 of these exotic cats that are being bred for that purpose alone every year. And so these animals live a horrible life of just constantly being manhandled and dropped. When the cubs don't want to be held, they kick and scream. And so what the handlers do to make them stop is they hold them under their arms, they bounce them up and down, they blow in their faces, which is what a mother cat does when she's disciplining her cub. It's like the last thing she does before she knocks them across the room. So the cubs know when they get that in the face, stop whatever they're doing.
Last warning, yeah.
Right. So it's an awful life for these animals, and it's adding to the problem every time they do it. If probably not even half of them are surviving this horrible handling, but to continue breeding animals to support the animals that you have is just crazy. And that's what we hear from so many of these people. They say, well, we can't support our facility if we don't breed more animals. If you're breeding more animals, if they survive, they're going to be more mouths to feed. And so you can never get ahead of that game. It mystifies me that people think that could be an excuse for breeding animals. They do it because it's easy money right now.
And again, it's just obviously a very sharp philosophical gulf. And again, I guess you made a reference to this earlier, but I'm sure people, saw the national news kind of when swimming with tiger cubs was a story there for a while. And so for people who didn't see that story, basically you can go to this place and, if you want to, swim with these tiger cubs. And of course, my understanding, which may or may not be accurate, is that they're cubs and they're scared, so they're just trying to get back to the edge. So it seems like you're swimming with cubs, but they're basically panicking and trying to get out of the water, right?
And that's exactly the issue. When people are paying to have their picture made with a cub, that cub is kicking and screaming and wants desperately to get away. So some of these people came up with the bright idea that, we'll just put the person in the pool and then the cub has to hang on to them because otherwise the cubs, feels like they're going to drown. And so then they can get their picture and they feel like, this cub loves me. This cub doesn't love you. This cub's hanging on for dear life.
Survival instinct, yeah.
And this place up in Dade City got hammered by the Florida Wildlife Commission for doing this. And then the Florida Wildlife Commission came back and said, well, okay, we're going to let you do it, but you can't keep throwing the cub back in the pool. But USDA and Florida Wildlife Commission don't do undercover investigations. So nobody's ever going to be there to see that she's going to be probably continuing to throw those cubs in there. And for what? For a couple $100 for an animal that then could live 20 years and it costs us $10,000 per tiger per year to take care of them properly. So when you're adding constantly to the number of animals you have to take care of, and they cost so much to take care of them, it's destined to fail. Yeah.
But let me ask about, just because in sort of announcing your appearance, I got all kinds of emails and Facebook messages, and certainly stirred up all kinds of reactions. So one of the things that happened amongst those is I received kind of a scorching email about you and Big Cat Rescue regarding rabbits. So we only have maybe a minute or less for the whole final part of our chat here. So I don't know if you want to just briefly address that or...
Sure. For the long story, if people are interested, they can go to bigcatrescue.org and just in the search bar type feeding rabbits, and they'll find a very lengthy explanation that we did of that. We do bobcat rehab and release, where bobcats are sent back to the wild if they were born in the wild. And in order to properly prepare them for living in the wild, they have to know who their food sources are, and we have to make sure that they are capable of killing their food sources. So they have enclosures where they're taught to hunt. We have 2 baby bobcats right now that are learning to hunt together. And we feel horrible about the fact that any animal is killed for food. I'm a vegetarian. My husband really leans toward veganism. We're not going to kill animals to feed ourselves, but these cats are carnivores and they have to eat meat. So anybody who loves rabbits or loves any kind of animal that's farmed for food, they should be like our biggest supporters, because we're trying to stop the industry that is breeding so many of these big cats out there who are eating all of these other animals. If we can do away with the private possession of exotic cats, all those animals are saved. And so it's it's just a diversionary tactic to try and cause divisiveness among the animal groups. We have a number of friends in other animal rescue groups.
Right. I think who I heard from, I think, was more in the rabbit realm. But I think what may have been overlooked in some of this is the big cat rescue. Those cats aren't all permanent residents, that you are rehabilitating and then releasing the ones depending on how they got there. So that's sort of a different form of how they're cared for and fed and trained if they're going to go back out into the wild, as opposed to kind of just being a lifelong residence.
Right. We usually only have 1 or 2 rehab bobcats per year.
Yeah.
So you're talking a very small
and I assume
percentage.
Those are the only ones where this rabbit situation happens.
Live rabbits, yes.
Right. Okay.
Our other population gets all kinds of food, but it's always arrives frozen.
We've been speaking with Carole Baskin. We'll have you back on, of course, and hopefully much sooner than 6 years next time. From Big Cat Rescue, the website, huge, sprawling, deep, comprehensive website is bigcatrescue.org, and they're also on Facebook at Big Cat Rescue. So, Carole, thanks so much for joining us again on Talking Animals, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care. All right, we have just about reached the end of today's edition of Talking Animals on WMNF Tampa. We'll be back next Wednesday. I'm Duncan Strauss. Thanks very much for listening. Have a good week. Be kind to animals. Be kind to others. Be kind to yourself. I also hope you visit our website at talkinganimals.net, where we make available all sorts of information, as well as archives and podcasts of past Talking Animals programs. We also have a link to the Talking Animals Facebook page, our Twitter feed, and more. Please like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. That's all found at talkinganimals.net on WMNF Tampa and beyond. Thanks for listening. Speak with you again next Wednesday at 11 a.m. on Talking Animals. Thanks.